Hey, good day, fellow deal makers. Welcome to the Deal Scout. On today's show, we're going to have a conversation with a guy on the West Coast who's doing some interesting things in the world of e-commerce, buying stuff, aggregating stuff, building products, and showing you guys how to do it too. Oren, welcome to the show.
Man, Josh, pleasure to be here, and looking forward to chatting.
Yeah. Now, how the heck do you pronounce your last name, man? That is a
Uh,
unique name.
Schauble, I know that's look. If you go to Europe, it's the same last name as like the Prime Minister of Finance in Germany, so plenty of people know it. But in the U.S., no chance.
What's the worst someone's butchered that name as? Oren
Oh, I
Schauble.
think Schauble. I think is
Schauble?
probably as I was getting. Yeah.
Cool, man. All right. So, what the heck do you do? Right. I kind of got a brief thing from your guest intake form, but like, what do you do?
All right, got it. So look, I spent the last couple of years kind of facilitating a big public company roll up of a bunch of different companies in the cannabis space. And then once that kind of roll up was done and passed on to a new executive team, I work at a product development agency and I run a newsletter about how people bring products to life. And we use that to facilitate relationships and deals, whether that's doing product development through the agency or whether that's helping people acquire similar companies or just build better businesses. I kind of live within the product development world day in and day out.
Awesome, man. All right. So you look like a young fella. How old are you? Let's start
Uh,
there.
I'm 36. So not quite as young as not quite as young as I look, but I'm in Orange County, so we keep a real health and wellness regimen. Beach time, no alcohol. They call it California sober. We're the whole nine.
Oh, super cool. All right. So how in the world did you get this? People spend their whole life trying to get into the place of being able to do roll-ups, work with, public companies, aggregating, buying stuff. Like, how in the world did you get in it? Kind of give us your background.
Yeah, no problem. So I worked at a handful of startups first. So I worked in a technology startup in the defense space. Then I worked in technology startups building the consumer drone channel. So you see camera drones inside all of retail. So I worked in that space for a while, helped build that out globally. Then I worked at another software company that eventually got acquired. And then I actually started a product development agency with some friends of mine. And really, we had seen an opportunity there when we were working in the startups is we were working with overseas contractors. We were working with a lot of factories in China, in Hong Kong. And we saw basically how much the middlemen were taking advantage of some of the companies, making it so they couldn't be competitive by, basically upcharging what you could do directly in China. So, we began to work to do product development with complicated engineering here in the States, and then work with production with a team on the ground in China and be able to kind of connect the dots there. And that kind of opened up a whole new world because we began to see just, how much margin could happen going direct overseas. We had success with a couple of projects. Because I kind of had this unique background of being in retail, being in complicated products like the defense space and the drone space. When the cannabis space launched, it's a whole new industry, right? And anytime you open up into a new industry, people look for relevant backgrounds. And since I've been in kind of controversial, technology that had to be messaged, that made a lot of sense. And then it was honestly my first public roll up. I hadn't known as much about vehicles there. I was familiar with things like a Reg A Plus, and I was familiar with the idea of going public, but we did a roll up that eventually, took over a shell and went on to the OTC markets. And those are all was completely new terms. But look, that's when you're doing entrepreneurial things and you're trying out new industries. That's where the biggest opportunity is to learn and get ahead of new things. And I've always just tried to be on the edge in anything I try to do.
Yeah. Now, when you went through this vehicle, did you guys leverage a SPAC or was this a different
We didn't.
tactic?
It was basically, it was essentially a reverse merger. So there's an existing company that was on OTC that had been there for a long time that was flailing. And, we came and took a successful private company and merged it into that vehicle.
Yeah. Did you guys have to raise capital to make that happen, or did you guys use internal cash on hand? How did you
We
make that work?
we didn't. There was luckily there was within that vehicle that we were taking over, and we basically worked through this in the merger terms. They had some investments in other companies that were IPOing basically, and so
Yeah.
we knew that there was a certain amount of capital coming within that vehicle, and so we basically valued our private company with the assets that we had, and this public company that didn't have many assets, but at least had some of these investments that we knew we could generate cash from, and kind of valued it accordingly when we did the deal.
Okay. So what you just said, let's go back in time, 20 years ago, and you're saying that to your 16-year-old self. Like, what?
Yeah, no idea.
You have no idea. All right. So this
Yeah.
is something you've learned from being in the trenches, and actually making one of these deals happen.
Yeah, and I would have said that, looking 20 years ago, I actually remember I had a really formative class when I was in high school. I had a money management class, which was just random. Most schools I know don't have a thing. It was like an elective in math. And I had thought at the time I wanted to be an accountant. I was going to go to to business school to be an accountant. So I took this money management class, and it was top. I remember this guy who, he drove a Corvette. He had like a gold chain. He was like a retired, it's like this was his retirement thing, was to teach people money management.
Yeah.
But the thing that was most formative about that is we did like this virtual stock exchange thing. So at the beginning of the semester, you onboard into the virtual stock exchange, you buy a bunch of stocks, and you kind of work through that. And I remember having a ton of fun in that process. And I asked my brother, who was actually at Goldman at the time, like what he would invest in, and like invested in a bunch of that and ended up doing really well. But if I had kind of leveraged more of that and just learned more there and learned what the difference between NASDAQ and the OTC markets and the pink sheets. And I think there's a lot to learn there that isn't particularly that hard. It's just few people ever take the excuse to learn. And I think few people understand what amount of a vehicle that is. If you have a business in any space and you want to combine it with a few others and do a roll up and see liquidity on the public market, or see options to raise capital and scale on the public market, is a lot more accessible than I think people realize.
Yeah. Now it's exciting running a business and being a founder, being in tech, and you're working in drones and cannabis and stuff that are leading edge.
Yeah.
But taking a company public is a lot of work, a lot of compliance, a lot of paperwork, a lot of sleepless nights, right? So, kind of explain that process. What did you learn? And if you could, if you and I could kind of go backwards and do that deal a little differently, what would you do?
Got it. So there was a ton what to be learned. A lot of it was having to deal with investor relations and messaging. I think the biggest thing I would recommend to anybody is, no matter how complicated your scenario is, really messaging your way through it and being, upfront and constantly communicating with your shareholders, especially now where there's no reason, if you do like a shareholder call or you release information, you shouldn't be able to have a public forum on Twitter Spaces or YouTube Live or Reddit or any of those things to actually engage. And so we did a lot of that. So I think we had a relatively younger group involved who kind of understood that. But I think that managing that IR is one that, even though we did a ton of it, I would have done even more. So that's a big one. And then it's just, it's like the little things, like accounting's the biggest pain point. It's no matter how much you think that you have your numbers together, or you trust this team, or you've been putting this together, is, it's everyone's extremely worried about it's going to be, if it's right or wrong. And then in new and emerging industries that have complex tax vehicles or have different understandings of accounting practices, then you may, it's a lot more complicated than one might think. And so that was where I think a lot of our sleep is I was like, hey, we bought this one business that does manufacturing accounting. We bought this other business that doesn't do manufacturing accounting. We have to report on this in 30 days. There's a lot of integration there related to purely accounting logistics, I think, is something that you can't ever have enough firepower for.
Yeah. I love what you're saying about communication between your shareholders, right? IR is so important. When you take this approach of taking people's money, right? Like taking their money and applying it to your business and investing it, right? Like there's a fiduciary responsibility and a trust that goes on. When you talk about communications, give us some tips and tricks for, proper investor relations, communications, different, maybe how often, how long, what to say, what not to say. Could you give us some of your overviews of what you've learned?
I think a lot of it is allowing personalities within the company to be able to engage. We had a lot of why our IR had been successful at the time, or at least was getting interest, is we had a lot of people that were on Twitter who were in certain positions, who weren't afraid to and had permission to be able to engage and message and kind of go back and forth within the parameters that we had. And so I think step one for any company is just have a guide of what you can and can't say, so people kind of know what's allowed. And then have a kind of open forum where you can discuss what those questions look like, so people know the issues that shareholders are dealing with, and then let people talk. So I think that's a big one. And then second is treating it the same way you treat marketing content in any business. Like if you're a retail business and you're putting things on social media, or you're putting point of sale displays in, is making that same kind of content for IR as well. One of the big things we noticed doing a roll up is a few of our actual shareholders, especially existing shareholders in the vehicle we used, understood how many assets this roll up now had. And so it was as simple as, hey, let's do a video where we show briefly every single asset that we have, and it's not like the kind of thing that's going to get hundreds of thousands of views, but if it gets 1,000 views from your shareholder base and they begin to understand the company more, like that's important. So I think a content strategy, and it doesn't have to be glamorous or high end or anything, but just actually practically showing what the business does and why you believe in it, is really valuable. So those would be the two biggest things, that guide and that communication protocol, and then, treating it like its own kind of content vehicle as well.
Yeah, I think that's so cool. What about investor relations when things aren't going awesome, right? When it's going great, you want to tell everybody, hey, Sally, hey, Bob, things are great, and here's your returns and all that stuff. What about when things aren't going great?
Well, I think of it from just my shoes as an investor myself, right? Is is you just want to know, right? You don't want it to be, okay, when everything's great, I get communicated with all the time. And when everything's bad, I get communicated with never, right? And so I think it's just keeping that same cadence, even when it's hard, is super important, and something I think we see companies go down on all the time. And guess what? It might end up with a share price that goes down because people don't want to hear the truth. But also, it's just going to be at least the people that are with you understand what the challenges are. And this is less to do with the public companies, but in private companies I've been in investor updates is making asks and like consistently saying, hey, here's our issues and here's what we need. I really need a experienced operations person who can do an ERP integration, or I really need, we need to hire and these X roles, or hey, we need working capital. And I think that in a public company, you're not going to be asking your shareholders for help necessarily, but in a private company, it should be done significantly more, because that's what your investors and your board, you should be getting some leverage from them as well. And I think people don't make those asks enough.
Yeah. We forget sometimes, I've taken on investor capital and I've worked with a bunch of different, startups and such. And what I find is when things aren't going great, sometimes you get embarrassed and you're like, I'm just going to fix this, right? Like before I bring it to them and I go, all right, guys, here was a problem and I fixed it. I'm an all-star, right? Yeah. But in the middle of a problem, like leveraging the talent behind the investor dollar, that's smart wealth, right? Wisdom, work, network, their advice, super valuable. And they could save the day. They could jump in and, rescue you, right? Bring in one of their buddies.
Takes a village.
Takes a village, yeah. So how, now you're investor, right? Before you were kind of in the trenches as a founder. What makes you a better investor today than other investors who might have had money handed down or a lotto winner?
What I've really tried to focus on doing is, especially as I became getting into more and more executive roles, was still just remaining really tactical and saying, hey, I'm still involved in, hey, in the SEO of a website project, or understanding what the teams deal with on the ground. Because I think that being able to come in and actually help with existing issues and just kind of do things like audit infrastructure or marketing or systems or process and kind of help with that advice versus being purely high level. I feel like a lot of people get to a certain level of success and say, hey, I'm an investor now or an advisor now. And I just kind of, I have platitudes, I have high level strategy, but while all that's great and useful, there's a lot of people that can provide that. And oftentimes founders look at themselves as the people that have that guidance, when really what they need is the blocking and tackling on the ground of like, hey, you're not documenting your process, or, hey, like you should be looking at these tools, or like a recommendation for an employee or anything like that. And so in any of the businesses that I'm involved with currently, I try to be, it's just extremely active on a tactical level as well, versus just purely in strategy. Even though that takes more time, I feel like that also leads the founders to have more value from my investment.
So when was your first home run, right? Like you've had some base hits, you might've had some strikeouts or get pegged with the ball. When was your first like either home run, triple, or grand slam? How old were you?
Honestly, I've had a consistent amount of medium wins. Like I've never had just the giant one. It's been kind of compounding time over time, which I think is interesting. But I think that it's just kind of knowing that, hey, this investment yielded back 4x, or and it was small, or this, and so I've just had a lot of those, but kind of ranging from mostly over the last 7 or 8 years. So kind of from my late 20s on, and again, so never had a multi-million-dollar like giant home runs, but had lots of these compounding successes that I think is almost a more realistic way to look at it, especially if you're looking at the kind of modern world here where you can have crazy valuations in tech that come and go any minute. But if you're involved in a lot of cash flowing successful businesses, and you continue to see those kind of base hits, then really you're just kind of building your own little, I don't want to call it like your own little Berkshire Hathaway, but your own little like portfolio of things that have kind of had long-term success. I think that's a more interesting approach, or at least a more practical approach, than constantly looking for what this next giant home run is going to be. Because for a lot of people, that might never come.
Yeah, no, I love this message about this because, growing up, I was super risky. I've been in venture and I've been building a tech company, but I've always was shooting for the moon, right? Either go big or go home. And in the process, you go big and sometimes you lose big. And I've been bankrupt and I've gone through that process. And, like what I'm learning now, and I'm 40 now, and maybe this is just wisdom from getting our ass whooped, is, base hits are awesome. Compounding base hits will, I'd rather that any day than one grand slam, maybe in my lifetime.
And interesting on that point too. One thing that was really impactful for me in that stage was I had a mentor who I was just talking to him about his investment portfolio, and he mentioned he basically had 100 investments, that were between $25,000 and $100,000. Like that was his entire investment strategy. It was small bets he doesn't spend a lot of time on. And I remember that's how I started my investment strategy. And now I have a lot of companies that I put $10,000 to $50,000 in, and looking at it like that and saying, hey, I'm going to do that instead of your typical investments in a 401k or any of those. I think it's just a really interesting way to do it, especially, and I try to only do that with cash flowing businesses if possible, but sometimes you make other bets. And I think that's an interesting thing for people to look at too, is that there's no reason that you can't be making like those kind of investments as well, and really building up a portfolio. If you look at, hey, I'm going to try and do one of those a year, which is something I think anyone can likely save to do, you're going to really look at seeing some pretty increased benefits.
Yeah. Now I love this strategy. As I get older, I want cash flow businesses. I want base hits, maybe some doubles. I don't even mind getting hit with the ball as long as I get on base, right? Like, so my mindset shifted towards more investing in this portfolio approach, like you were saying, rather than a 401k or something that it's just like, here's money in the public market. Who knows what's going to happen? I like getting tactical in these businesses. As an investor right now, you've had your own startups, you've been a founder, you did a roll up, but now you're stepping into this portfolio investor approach, right? In running your own businesses. What does a day look like for you? Because you got product development, you got investments. Like, what's a day look like for you?
Yeah, and so look, I really like to, I really enjoy working. So there's my days are, to have kind of a full span. But really, we have the actual day-to-day work of, running client work and agency things, which is a lot of, so there's a stand up every day. There's usually about two client meetings that I'll be in roughly every day. And then, like this afternoon, for instance, I'm leading a workshop. I usually do 1 to 2 workshops a week, specifically around an item. So like last week, for instance, I did an SEO workshop where we had really kind of dove into a company had bought a content site for their domain authority, basically. And we kind of dove into how do we use that to get key terms that matter to that business and map that out, and who's going to make the content, what does the content look like, and how do we make sure it's successful. So we'll have stand-ups, we'll have client meetings, I'll have a workshop every week. I usually travel to see a project, roughly about twice a month. And then the rest of the time, a lot of what we're doing is researching and creating content. Ends up being a lot of my time, whether it's kind of doing podcasts like this or really looking at, hey, we're trying to find factory solutions or potential acquisitions or just kind of things that we're bubbling around the surface to make a difference to our various companies. Because with the product development stuff that we're doing now, I publish a newsletter every week where I aggregate factories and manufacturers in different industries. And so I take some time to put all those together. But really, the actual benefit of that is we email that out to thousands of people every week. Some of them start making businesses in those industries. When they're communicating back with us, what I'm really interested in doing now is I'm starting to see, hey, there's 4 or 5 serious cosmetics businesses that I have relationships with, or 4 or 5 serious health and wellness businesses. And then it's like, can we orchestrate a roll up there? Or can we, say, hey, maybe if you guys shared accounting and marketing services and moved to one factory, there's some benefit here. And can we get, a block of ownership for helping facilitate that? That's the kind of stuff I'm really interested in looking at now. And a lot of that is just, whether it's in the DMs or on a call, it's just talking to founders and just kind of talking to these folks. And that's kind of the biggest challenge I think I'm working on trying to solve these next few weeks is I want to transition that from me being on the phone all the time to, can we do that in a community, in a Discord or a Slack or something, or can we find some new vehicle that makes sense to help facilitate those relationships?
Yeah, no, that's super cool, man. Good job. This is so awesome. SEO and Google, that's been going on for like 20 years. And this is one of your main focus. Now you're an investor, you've got capital, you're doing roll-ups, and you're like, guys, we're running boot camps, we're running these sessions, we're teaching still about something. Why is that so important? And
so it's funny because everyone's obsessed, especially now with, I feel like anyone who hires the right agency or finds the right creative team can probably start making a profit on, TikTok ads, Facebook ads, Instagram ads, if you have a decent product, right? But the thing is, it doesn't last or it hits diminishing returns. And then if you have demands of investors to scale, and then all of a sudden you're not getting that same ROI, you end up in a hard place. What I love about SEO and what I recommend super highly for businesses that can take advantage is it takes 6 months or a year to really build any level of momentum. So everyone kind of avoids it because they want, quick wins. But then once you have it, it's there forever. And so we worked with a brand called Chlorophyll Water that, we built up their SEO to kind of number 1 in that category. It was a small water category over time. And then it went viral on TikTok and had like billions of hashtags on TikTok. And guess what? When that moment happened for them in that category, owning that number 1 on SEO, was just absolutely massive play for them. And so if you believe that you have a unique category or believe that you have search traction over time, it's going to last forever. It's like that. So SEO and email lists are the only things that aren't going to come and go. Like Facebook ad ROI is going to change. TikTok our ad ROI is going to change. Same thing. Retail experiences go away with COVID or anything like that. But Google search and email last forever.
Yeah, that's super cool. SEO and email lists. It's things that they're assets. They're things that you own.
Agreed.
And a lot of companies are just missing putting a focus there.
Yeah, well, one of the funniest parts about missing on SEO, and a conversation I have probably twice a month, is, hey, you should just name your products what people are searching for. So instead of naming your sunglass the Genesis, you should name it, like matte black men's whatever. Like just put like an exact thing that people are looking for, and then develop a product roadmap if you're getting searches for something you don't sell. So there's what happens is the marketing teams and the product teams like don't overlap in terms of how to take advantage of some of these kind of blocking and tackling scenarios.
Yeah, it's what are people searching, right? That's filling an instant need. And if you just named your product that, it's brilliant.
It sounds like common sense, but it is. And that's and funny too is the same thing's happening on TikTok. People search TikTok as often as they search Google, and this is across generations. And so if you have the same thing happening there, where you're going to feed someone a video for a thing they're searching for, you can find a certain level of success, and that's just a giant untapped mine.
What tools? So we're trying to improve our, SEO and email
Yeah.
lists and such. We're working on that now. What tools would you recommend for a fellow creator, fellow founder, runs multiple, companies, and we're trying to figure this out? What tools do you recommend?
Yeah, so there's a tool called Ahrefs, Ahrefs, and so it's a paid tool. It's like $100 a month, that kind of thing. But what that does that I love is that you put your website in, and it kind of spits out where you rank on all these terms, and then it has ideas. And so you can enter a list of terms, and it will give you ideas related to those and their difficulty and the average search volume, so you can find opportunities. And then you can do competitive analysis. And so when I do an SEO workshop like we did last week, you plug in your own site, see what you've got going, come up with some ideas based on the words you have in there. You plug in the words you think you want to rank for, explore it, find some ideas. And then you go take 5 or 10 competitive websites and put them all in there, see what they rank for, and see the ideas that come from there. And you kind of develop this master sheet of, okay, we have hundreds of these terms. And usually what we do is we just chunk it out by the name of the term, how difficult it is, and then how much search volume it has. And you start to see things pop out like low difficulty, high search volume. And then you just identify those as your primaries. But that tool is a little hard to use, like if you're not super text centric, but like if you spend some time with it, it's super useful, and at least it will help you get a roadmap for how you want to improve your SEO and what terms you want to focus on.
That's super cool, man. All right, so talk to us about your product development company. So you built some cool stuff, drones in the cannabis industry, and now you have a firm dedicated for this to help other people. What
Yeah,
does that look like?
so it's called Guinn Partners. It's been around for a couple of years, and so it's based in Austin, Texas. There's about 25 full-time engineers that work there now, and really we're focused on really complicated products. So in my product world kind of site and newsletter, I'm really focused on e-commerce, like base hits, like you want to make jewelry, you want to make supplements, you want to make clothing, like that kind of stuff. Where our agency focuses on really hard things. So we've done basically anything related to robotics, autonomy, mobility. And so we worked on the e-foils, which is kind of like the hydrofoil electric surfboards. We've worked on single person flying aircraft. There's one called the lift aircraft. We've worked on all these kind of really specific niche products that have to do with, like lithium ion batteries, like really complicated stuff is where we like to focus. And a lot of that was, we had worked together previously in drones. So a lot of those clients come from drones. And then when you learn drones, you have to learn autopilots, which then applies to any kind of vehicle. You also have to learn batteries, which applies to any of this kind of new electric world we're in. So we really focus there. We've got our core office, and we have what's called the Center for Autonomous Robotics out in Austin, where we partner with a VC firm called Capital Factory to put a little incubator on the lake in Austin, where different companies have offices, and they have shared spaces with 3D printers and smaller like some kind of key equipment out there. And so we're trying to facilitate the ecosystem there as well. And look, it's just become a really interesting company. We've basically helped. There's 3 stages of which people work in, right? One, they have an idea and they need a prototype. They'll come with a sketch or say, I want to make this thing. And it's like, all right, let's make one and see what we can do. The other is, hey, we came with a prototype, but now we actually need to be able to make this affordably and sell it. And that's kind of the second niche. And then the third is, okay, we're making a thing, but we really need to make it cheaper or better and like scale it out. And then you can help with supply chain and iterations and things like that. And so, yeah, it's a really exciting place to work and facilitate. And, it's been going on for a handful of years, and Austin's a great place to have it. There's a ton of, they moved the Defense Innovation Unit there for the Army. So there's a lot of interesting work happening there. It's always been kind of a hotbed for kind of drones and mobility. And so, yeah, it's an exciting space to be in.
All right, so let's just say we tabula rasa, cleaned out all the cool things that you've worked on in the past. but except for one. And you're like, doesn't like, let's set aside money, set aside, but there was like one cool product that you or one of your clients have worked on that you're like, if I accomplish nothing else but getting that one thing to the market, I would choose that again.
That's a really interesting question. I do love the lift foils, e-foil, like so it's basically a hydroelectric surfboard,
Super
mainly
cool.
because it's just such a unique experience. Like when you're on top of that thing and you're like kind of flying over water, and you have this sensation because you're on the hydrofoil, so that you're not actually touching the water, you're just kind of purely flying. I think it's as close as like a person can get to feeling like they're flying. And it's a niche product for kind of high end water sports enthusiasts, but it's just it's so perfect when you're on it and engaging with it that's one that I have a lot of love for.
Yeah, I've seen one of those in action, and it looks like a surfboard or whatever. And then as you start going, it like lifts like a foot or two over the water,
Yeah.
and it looks like the guy's flying.
Exactly. And it feels like it when you're actually on it. You have this sensation that it's like very, very hard to describe. But once you get on it for long enough, and this is a company I work with like pretty significantly. We worked with them on the product development side, and I've worked with them as an advisor for a long time. Is like once you actually get used to that experience, like you're just in this like very like it's like a flow state that you're just happen to be. You can engage in at any time, and it just is no way for your mind or your body to feel that way doing anything else.
Yeah. All right. So if I come visit you in Austin or on the West Coast, we're
Oh,
going
let's
for a
go.
ride.
Hell yeah, brother. Let's go.
All right.
Yeah.
Super cool. I love it. All right. So when you're working with these people, they could come to you with an idea, scratched it on a piece of paper, and they're like, all right, this thing does, it's a
Yeah.
skateboard that flies, whatever. Back to the Future, right? And you go, cool. We'll help build the prototype. Is that what your group can do? Has the
Yep,
capacity
exactly.
to?
And so that's and that is a little bit easier than it seems. Like we've systemized that process and said, okay, let's break this down to its components. Like, what is its propulsion or power system? What's its actual ID? What does it need to accomplish? Does it need a circuit board? Does it need And so we have kind of a process for actually developing that. But and in a lot of cases, people, when they actually walk through that process, they realize there's some core flaw in their idea. Oh, they can't draw this much power to execute that in this size. And so a lot of things kind of fail at the prototype level. But when you do see an idea that happens, you actually make the one thing and you see the look on a founder's face or look on someone experiencing it and you go, oh, this is a new thing you've kind of brought into the world. That's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, I've tried to create some inventions back in the day, and I drew it up, and then I sent it off to a firm, and they wrote me back, and they said, "Hey, this is going to cost that much." I'm like, "Holy crap, I can't afford that. I got to go sell a kid or something."
Yeah.
Like, how does that process work? So I'm a founder, I'm an inventor, super creative. I come to you with an idea. How does this work together?
Usually it starts off with we do a lot of like workshops and exercises. Usually it starts off with that, like, hey, we're actually going to sit down. We're going to get some smart people in the room who have some level of core competency in what you're already doing. If it's a medical device, we've got some people for that. If it's software, we've got some people for that. If it's mobility, or a vehicle or whatever it is. And then we really talk through it like front to end. So then okay, we're going to get one session. We're going to pay for a session sitting down with these people. And we're going to kind of know throughout that, after we're completed with that, is this actually viable? So you can kind of walk away and before you've spent a bunch of money saying, okay, I shouldn't actually do this. And what happens a lot is it might be viable, but people realize the work it's going to take to actually bring something to life at scale. And they go like, you know what, maybe not. And then if you have something that's viable and you want to build out the roadmap for it, then you have a decent amount of a cost of like, hey, here's some projections. And we'll go and get some data of what we think units are going to cost at this quantity or this quantity, what's going to cost for development, and actually gets kind of fully quoted out. But a lot just comes down to that exercise of like, identifying, is this going to work or not? Is there competitors who hadn't thought of? Is there technology that would actually make this easier than you thought it would be because there's some new breakthrough? And just sitting down in a room and working through it.
Yeah, super cool. So what products will you touch? What products will you not touch?
We will touch almost in this particular company. We're really focused on things that have lithium ion or lithium polymer batteries. Things that use telemetry, which is basically if you have antennas or radios that are putting you to a certain point in space, and if it's got autonomy, like it has an autopilot, like those are really sweet spots for us for like those particular electronics. But we will touch almost anything that the founder is really passionate about, that actually has the resources to execute working through, and that there is a real consumer demand in the market for. And so we've developed toys and rescue devices and things related to camera accessories aren't really our core competency because we saw how enthusiastic someone was. Things that we won't touch a lot is we have a lot of recommendations for people that are doing consumer packaged goods products, and we'll help you with your SEO, or we'll work through one or two things there. But the actual development of that, there's actual experts who can really work through the manufacturing of those things. I'd rather just send you to a factory. So we don't touch that as closely. And then things that are intensely complicatedly regulated, or require kind of importing of parts that have to do with like ITAR or like all these restrictions you have if you want to move something from the US to a different country. That's something where we might touch it, but it often ends up being more trouble than it's worth.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. All right, so what is something that you wish as a as a deal maker and investor, what is something you wish someone would bring in front of you and said, "Hey, I've been working on this idea." What are you like hoping someone walks and knocks on your door for?
I think a lot about Dyson, who kind of completely, and then moving to, the way they kind of rethought of how people push air back and forth and just have a completely new concept for it. And so I don't really care what the actual application is, but I want someone who has that kind of idea, like, hey, let's completely reframe the way we think about a common item. I think that's where a lot of disruption happens currently, because we have all these big entrenched companies that we've grown up with, whether it's, Nabisco, or whether it's food, or whether it's electronics. It's like a lot of the same groups that have been around for 100 years, and they're not thinking like that. There's a lot of opportunity in just taking a couple percent of their market share and building a 10 or $20 million business relatively quick. And so I think anyone who's kind of really rethinking a core competency in a new way using technology, I'm interested to talk to.
Yeah. When you see something, what are some, as a product development firm, you've built a bunch of stuff. Like, how many products do you think you personally have taken from idea to some level of market in your career?
Definitely more than 50,
Super
probably
cool.
more than 100. If you start looking at like, you'll take a product and you'll build 3 attachment SKUs, or, kind of accessories. So it's definitely kind of in the 100 plus. And between all the people that have worked on it, like I work on projects individually, so there are a lot of people at the firm, like it's in the hundreds, which is kind of crazy to think about when you look at like all the patents involved and all of the actual things that are on shelves, and some of them have lived long lives, some of them that have kind of died or were trend and moved on. It's kind of staggering, but it's interesting to think about it actually bringing things to life.
Yeah. All right. So you and I are doing a deal together. Let's just say you and I are going to form up and build something super cool. What's your superpower, and what is a weakness that you would look for maybe from me or someone else?
Got it. And so I'm super process driven. Like I like coming to a company and saying, hey, we're going to document the way we do things. We're going to kind of put it in this kind of framework, and we're going to follow that framework until it's successful. And I'm also really focused on people and how do we make sure people are really excited and feel like they're valued and feel like they're working on something that has a lot of mission. And so I really like to focus on that for we're partnering. Where I have my biggest concerns is where it's people that talk a lot or have a lot of excitement about something, but don't actually do the day-to-day tasks. Like anyone that feels above anything. I have no problem getting on a sales call, like at any point and doing that. I don't ever want to feel above working on the line for half a day, or, or getting in the mix of a sales conversation. And I found a lot of people that do. And for some reason, that just kind of really bothers me. It's because I feel like no matter where, I don't know how you can expect kind of team members to look up to you if you're not willing to kind of go into any of those roles. And so that's kind of the biggest red flag I look at, is when someone's like, oh no, I don't do that. It's like, well, in a startup environment, we're all doing it. Like, it is what it is, no matter what your background or success is.
Yeah, I just emptied my trash can, right? Like, and I just
Yeah.
washed our dishes, right? Like, we're a small startup, so like, this is when you're an entrepreneur, you got to wear, even as an investor, you got to be willing to put on many different hats, and if not, that's a red flag for me too. It's teamwork. Um, Through your career, what's some advice do you have when it comes to choosing your team, choosing a partner, choosing investors? Like, what are some things that you're like, I wish I knew this 20 years ago?
Yeah, I think one thing that's really stood out to me is you can't kind of predict where life will go for anybody, and that
Yeah.
people change, and that no matter how good you feel about someone one year or another year, like things are going to happen. And I would say it's worth it to stick through with people that you believed in, because they might have a rough 6 months or a rough year, or something might happen in their lives. That doesn't mean you should abandon it completely. And you're going to have those same things happen to you. And if you've taken care of those people, then likely the same will happen. Um, and then also a lot of it is just finding those people that don't turn off at like at 5 p.m. Right. And I'm not saying you have to work 20 hours in a day, but are you excited and passionate about things, whether it's work or not, the majority of the time? And if you find like-minded people that are like that, a lot of people feel like it's not okay to be like that all the time and be one of those obsessive people. But if you find a tribe of those kind of folks, like, you have something really valuable. And so I just like to remind people it's okay to be intense about things, and then gravitate towards other people like that. And if you can't find them in person, find them on the internet, and then really kind of build people that are equally as passionate about like life in the world as you are.
Yeah, no, that is such good advice, because I find Now, I love my wife and my kids. And then if you go out a little bit further, I have some people in my inner circle. But if you ask me, like, what's your hobby? If I get past wife and kids and hanging out with them and going, doing some stand up paddleboarding, if I get past those or camping, if I get past that, like, what do you do for fun? Work. I love my work. I love building stuff. I love investing in things. I love figuring this out. Like, that's my desire. It's my passion. It's my calling. It's what I'm put on this earth for. So when I
Yeah.
hang around people like that, we just jam. Do you find that
Yeah,
too?
it's magnetic, and it's funny you mentioned stand-up paddleboarding because that's my only actual hobby as well.
Yes.
But yeah, it's like once you actually find that, because it's not. I feel like once you've branched out and you are actually building things yourself or investing in things, it's no longer that work is a 9 to 5 job or it's just one thing I don't want to be too intense about. It's you have your thoughts and ideas in 100 different aspects of interesting businesses, and that's that's amazing. So yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. What kind of stand up paddleboard do you like to
I
ride?
have a vessel.
Okay. Do
Yeah.
you do you ever surf on it, or is it just flat
I
water?
do. Yeah, I do. I have a, it's not really a paddleboard, it's just like a long, it's basically a longboard,
Yeah.
just so I can surf on it if I want to. I had a hydrofoil incident a few years ago, got some stitches in the forehead. So I try to keep it a little more low key on in action the surf, but yeah, I love it. And, I'm out there 3, 4 times a week.
Bro, I'll tell you the coolest experience I ever had. I had a stand up paddleboard, an inflatable one, mind you.
Yeah.
So it was super cool. But I took my daughter, at the time she was like 6, and we went to East Coast. So the waves weren't huge, maybe 3 foot. And, and she surfed on it. Like I sat behind the board, I paddled her out, and she stood up, and I was like, bro, like the proudest dad. It was the
Yeah.
coolest thing
Let's
ever.
go.
It's so cool, man. Um, as you're building this stuff, right? Like, how do you find you've got a family? How do you find work life balance? Do you believe it? Do you think it's bullshit? Like, what are your thoughts on it?
It was really hard. When we were doing that roll up, I was in the office every day, and I was in the office every day for 12 plus hours. And that was really tough. Now kind of in this next, kind of post roll up world that we're in here, it's been a little easier just because, we're home most of the time. I'll go to meetings, but we kind of work. A lot of this is remote. I'll go out to Austin to kind of visit the studio, or I'll go to visit some clients, and being able to kind of work around that. So I know that, hey, guess what? Like, I'll pick up my kid at 4, and that's all right because I'll be back doing an hour at 8. Like, being able to work it around your life, which I feel like is a new concept, like kind of post pandemic, and build around that has been great. And then also just getting, I've tried to get my son really interested in the things that I work on. Like, this weekend I was sketching out some point of sale diagrams, and like he had his own graph paper and he had his little rulers and all that. And he's like sitting there next to me doing some of those things. And I want him to be a builder and a creator as well. And even little things like we take apart lots of, we go to the thrift store and we'll buy electronics and we'll take them apart and put them back together. And it's just like having him understand a little bit of what I do and having a passion for how things work, I think just makes that all naturally easier because we're both excited about whatever particular thing we're looking at that week or weekend.
Bro, that is so cool. I used to do the same thing. I would get like an old vacuum and I would take it apart and see how it works. I would cut open a baseball and see like how the guts of it.
Yeah.
Wow. So, do you come up with any ideas for inventions and product development on your own, or you just kind of take other people's ideas and build them?
I do a lot of ideation. I've basically gotten to the point where I have a lot more ideas and I have time to actually act on them. So that's a lot of what I do in my kind of weekly newsletter is I'll say, hey, here's a bunch of ideas I've had recently. And a lot of it's less about a idea for a specific invention and more of like a brand associated with one where it's like, hey, guess what? Like 80s nostalgia is huge right now. Here's some brands that are taking advantage of that. I really think that would be applicable in men's fitness and you should do it this way. And like, I'll put some of those out there to people just because I have my hands full of things I'm already trying to build, but I have no shortage of ideas. Like I love to kind of ideate. And a lot of it comes down to that, hey, what's the actual concept of a product? Then also some of it's just like, what is the brand or niche? That's what TikTok has taught me a lot about is just like, oh, if you apply this particular product, but you focus in on, late 30s goths, whatever the right demographic is, like you can make something. And I think that people can compartmentalize a lot differently than they could in previous years and succeed.
Yeah. So when you're coming up with an idea, what are some validation things that you do to see is this worth us throwing 100K into or not?
Yeah, and so we have a little. This is something we recommend for a lot of people that kind of come to the agency and are looking for try to see if they have product market fit. Is like, all right, hey, you can launch without actually having a product. If you get a prototype or you get like a functional looking prototype, make 30 or 40 social media videos. Like TikTok is the best for this because it will give you this kind of raw and filtered feedback, and featuring that, and put up a landing page with a pre-sale and say, hey, enter your email if you want to find out when this thing starts selling. and then just see if you get any level of response or traction. And if no one responds to any of your content and no one signs up on your email page, like you're probably not going anywhere. But if you're starting to get people asking, oh, when is this thing shipping? Or they're putting their email in for the pre-sale, then you're like, oh, you should really look at this. And so we're in this beautiful world right now where you can go validate something without making it and do it fast and affordably and spend $1,000 on ads and know if your product has some legs. And that's kind of a 0 to 1. It's a lot bigger if it's going to be like the next giant product, but you can validate something small for e-commerce relatively easily.
Yeah. And you could pre-sell it, which funds the project.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What about if you build it, they will come? Like, nah, man, this is a really great idea. My grandmother told me to do this and she thought it was great. And she said she would buy one, right? I'm going to go spend all this money. Have you seen that happen too? And then you see a warehouse full of junk?
Yeah, or of course. Look, what a lot of it comes down to, some people just don't have the juice to keep going through whatever adversity comes to them, even if it's a good idea. And some of that comes down to just human life. Sometimes things get worse than others, or mental toughness, or your co-founder fell apart, or whatever that ends up being. But yeah, I've seen plenty of warehouses full of stuff. And honestly, like my garage is full of things that are like half-assed ideas that didn't work. And that's all right, because you only need to have, the sunk cost of those tends to be a lot less than the profit of the ones that are successful.
Yeah. Half-ass ideas. Let's do this. Let's play a game. You and I are coffee shop or cocktail bar, whatever. And someone walks in, they go, hey, what's up, Oren and Josh? I've heard you guys on the show and I've got this great idea. And we're like, yeah, awesome. And they go, first, it's going to revolutionize the world and change it. And, there's 7 billion people in the world. And if only 1% buy it, right? Like we've heard the same pitch from 1,000 people, but they go, hey man, before I share the idea with you, here's my NDA. What's your typical response?
I mean, honestly, we tend to sign the NDAs. Like I'm not super worried about it. But it is one of those where it's like, you're probably taking yourself too seriously. But, if someone's lawyer or dad or something told to them, I'm not going to burst their bubble and be like, hey, guess what? That probably isn't going to matter. And you could probably take their idea anyway.
Yeah. See, when this is my view on NDAs, if that's the first thing that happens, I'd probably go, you know what, Oren, you take over if you guys do that, but I'm out. No, thank you.
I've just found like a lot of entrepreneurs, especially first time ones, just don't know any better. And I can't fault them for what they don't know yet. And, and I think that there's so many people that need that level of help that, sometimes it's worth, giving them that little run through.
Dude, I love you. You're a lot more patient than I am. That's awesome though. When let's just say we go to second base with someone, we see an idea and we're like, this is freaking awesome. And we're going to participate in it. Like what does that look like for the founder? If you're like, hey, this is actually good and we want to do it with you. Like what? Does that look like?
A lot of it comes down to, looking through, what capital, who's brought what capital to the table, whether we're bringing capital or they bring capital, and who's bringing what legwork to the table and who's bringing kind of what IP, and just really breaking it down to an equation that everyone's comfortable with. And, we have a couple different formats for how we do that depending on the product, but it's just kind of trying to find something everyone can be excited about.
Yeah. When it comes to protection of ideas, when it comes to like patents and provisional patents and patent applications and all those kind of things, like how do you guys approach that before pushing a bunch of stuff on social media, or do you just push it out there to validate?
Yeah, we push it out there and kind of actually get down into the actual execution of it as fast as we can. And have kind of found that even the people we know that have really good patents are still just dealing with tons of copycats in the market. It only gets you so far. And if it does, it's a ton of litigation and a ton of time to get there. So really you're better off just getting to market.
Yeah. Quick to market, get people paying for things. I find that I made a lot of mistakes in the past when I tried to protect too much rather than sell more, right? Selling more. Sales,
distribution heals a lot of wounds, let me tell you.
Yeah. Sales and revenue covers a multitude of sins, right? If you're doing a lot of that. Oren, this is super cool, man. When it comes to that surfboard, the foil surfboard, where can I find that, man?
So that's at liftfoils.com, and they have about 300 rental stands kind of worldwide, or partners that will actually go and give you like a little trial, and you can just get out there without having to kind of buy one and try it out. But yeah, that's a highly recommended experience. Let me tell you.
Awesome. And then when it comes to, I'm going to ask you a few more questions, but let's give you some plugs. Where, if someone in the audience are like, hey man, I got some ideas, or I want to participate, do a deal with you, what's a good place for people to connect with you and do a deal?
So a couple places. So I'm at Oren Meets World on Twitter. I spend a lot of time on Twitter and, kind of engaging with ideas there. Our website for our agency is guinnpartners.com. There's kind of a contact form on there for people that are looking to kind of work on something there. And then the site where I put out all our product ideas and everything is productworld.xyz. That's where kind of you can sign up for the newsletter of all the different factory ideas and all the different ideation stuff I put out every week. And that's kind of the best three places.
Cool. What questions should I have asked you during this interview about product development, or about?
You kind of covered a lot. I think the one I mentioned it a few times. We didn't go really deep on it. It's just like the opportunity that TikTok has, where it's just like costs are cheap, organic content goes far, massive audiences. That's one where I think people should lean in and embrace that, no matter what age demographic or product you're doing. That there's still like a huge shift happening there that hasn't fully been taken advantage of.
So let's dive in there just for a sec. Is the huge thing with TikTok, right? 40 years old. Should I be building a TikTok? I've got my companies or whatever. Should I be paying attention to this? Should I be afraid of it?
You should at least be paying attention to it, because we've seen the shift happen before. MySpace to Facebook, Facebook to Instagram, and now it's happening Instagram to TikTok, and it's happening fast. And the majority of the world is on there, of all age groups and types and sizes, and it's a medium I wouldn't be afraid of. And especially if you're running advertising, the return on ad spend you're getting on that platform versus Facebook and Instagram on the same products is significantly higher. It's like it was with Facebook 5 or 6 years ago. And so if you're making money online with ads, you should definitely be paying attention to it.
Yeah, super cool. As we're going through this, what are some of the things that you will be like a red flag in terms of like someone comes up with an idea and it seems like a decent idea, but you're like, red flag. I don't think you should pursue it, and here's why. What are some of the things that you see that just popped in my mind?
If it's something where if Amazon can make an Amazon Basics version of it, then I definitely would stay away from it. There's a lot of that. And then if it's something where you can't find multiple streams of distribution, if it's something where you say, hey, I can just sell it online, or I can only sell it in retail or other, I think that in this world, if you really want to look at success, you need to be able to have redundancy in terms of your distribution channels. And so I'd want you to see something that you have multiple ways that you could go to market in case one doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay. So if Amazon Basics can just replicate it and build it, then the competition.
Yeah. Then I'm like, hey, you might have a run, but you're probably not going to have longevity, because they're going to do it. They're going to copy it.
Yeah. And then the other one was multiple distribution channels. Give me an example.
Yeah. So basically, if you're saying, hey, I'm going to sell this product and we're going to sell it online, direct to consumer, and that's the only way we can make it work because we don't have the margins to go to retail, I'd be worried, because I'm like, hey, direct to consumer is great, but at some point you're going to hit a cap of scale. You're going to be able to do both. You're going to be able to go to retail and be able to continue direct to consumer, or the same thing where it's like, hey, we really can only sell this thing at retail stores. Like, it's the only way it makes sense. Like, and you can apply it to any number of things, but I like to look at, are there multiple angles which you can actually sell this product? You don't have to use multiple angles, but in case one starts faltering, making sure that there's an actual backup so the business doesn't have all its eggs in the, hey, we sell to this type of stores and now those are all closed basket.
Bro, I have so many questions for you. I got to keep going with a few, because I think this is going to, we work with a few e-com businesses and people who work in the product development space, and people who are trying to build stuff. What about competition, right? Like, when you're looking at an idea, how do you see if there's a niche, if there's a competitive gap? Like, how do you see that?
So this is where SEO comes into play big again. One of the things that succeeded really well with the Lift Foils product is we were able to own SEO for the category term e-foil. We were the first ones out there, and we were number one across everything. If you go into a category and someone else owns the number 1, 2, and 3 slots, or have a super dominant SEO position, I tend to avoid it. If the SEO position is like decent but not major, then you still have a big opportunity. Maybe you can overtake it. But that's one where I'm like, search is going to dominate such a big part of the business, and you're going to be paying that cost to put your ad there in perpetuity if you're not going to be able to have some level of being entrenched. And you can succeed, but it's way easier if you can actually find something where the SEO will work for you.
Yeah. Can I easily target and own the space that I'm building into? So good. One more time, where can people go to connect with you and do a deal with you?
So Twitter, Oren Meets World, and then you can sign up for the newsletter at productworld.xyz, and then the agency is guinnpartners.com. So any of those places, you can find me.
What was the with partners, or
Guinn, Guinn?
Okay, got it. Guinn Partners. Where does that name come from?
That's from one of the, so it was myself, this guy Craig, and this guy Colin were all the individual kind of 3 guys who worked on it. And Colin, who's the most prolific of us, that's his last name.
Oh, perfect. All right. I love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. All right, Oren, thanks for coming on the show. Did I miss anything?
No.
Or anything you wanted to give a shout out to?
Covered quite a lot. Hopefully people found it valuable.
Awesome. So, fellow deal makers listening in, or maybe watching this on YouTube, if you got an idea, if you would like to explore, some product development, building stuff, taking stuff to market, as always, reach out to our guests, say thank you, connect with them, do a deal with them, just connect directly with them. All their contact info will be in the show notes below. If you're working on a deal or something sounds interesting and you want to talk to us about it, maybe on the show, head on over to thedealscout.com, fill out a quick form, maybe get you on the show next. Till then, talk to you all next episode. See you guys.